At 8:02 in the morning, a rented tow truck idled in front of my lawn like it wanted to steal the moon. On the driveway sat a 20-foot shipping container hand-painted in full Bob Ross majesty, complete with snowy pines, a glassy lake, and the kind of blissed-out clouds that could cure insomnia. On the curb stood Marla Yates, HOA president, wearing a sun visor and the expression of a woman about to recite case law she found on Pinterest. She pointed at the container and commanded with the authority of someone who peaked in high school student government. "Remove the illegal shed immediately, or I will have it towed at your expense." I took a sip from my coffee mug that said there are no mistakes, only happy accidents, and calmly replied that it was not a shed. It was a shipping container, fully permitted as temporary storage. The tow guy squinted at the mural and said with genuine appreciation that those were some happy little trees. He looked almost emotional about it. Then the chain snapped, whipped across the asphalt with a sound like a gunshot, and the entire neighborhood screamed like we had just witnessed God blink. My name is Elliot Crane. I moved to Birch Ridge 2 years ago because I like quiet, mint tea, and not knowing my neighbors' blood types or their opinions on literally anything. I work from home doing software consulting, which means I spend 8 hours a day on video calls explaining to people that turning it off and on again really does solve most problems. I spend my evenings woodworking because there is something deeply satisfying about creating furniture that will outlive my mortgage. 6 months ago, I applied to build a modest 12 by 16-foot shed for my tools. I filled out the forms, paid the $75 application fee, submitted architectural drawings, and waited. What I received 3 weeks later was a 12-page denial from Marla's Birch Ridge Enrichment Association. Yes, she actually rebranded the HOA with her own acronym. The rejection cited visual pollution, excessive shedness, and my personal favorite, incompatibility with neighborhood aesthetic harmony. I called Marla to discuss it. She informed me in her most officious voice that Birch Ridge was moving toward a shed-free future. She actually said those words. A shed-free future. Like sheds were fossil fuels. When I asked what I was supposed to do with my table saw, miter box, and 70 pounds of clamps, she suggested I rent a storage unit across town and said it would be good exercise. Fine. No shed. So I did what any reasonable person with an internet connection and spite would do. I researched alternatives. Turns out, a shipping container falls under a completely different category than a permanent structure. Mobile, standardized, and entirely legal under the city's temporary storage allowance for up to 120 days with a simple online notification. No HOA approval required because it is not a structure. I found this buried in Municipal Code Section 14-7-3, and I may have printed it out and slept with it under my pillow. I ordered a 20-foot container, had it delivered on a Tuesday morning while Marla was at her Pilates class, tucked it behind my back fence, leveled it properly on concrete blocks, and then spent an entire weekend transforming it. I had been watching a lot of Bob Ross reruns because the man's voice is basically audible chamomile. So armed with exterior paint, brushes, and a stepladder, I created a landscape so soothing it could lower cholesterol and possibly cure mild depression. Snowy mountain peaks. A glassy lake reflecting impossible colors. Pine trees that looked happy to exist. Clouds that seemed personally peaceful about their situation. It took me 16 hours and 7 podcast episodes about Viking history, but when I finished, I stood back and actually said wow out loud to nobody. The neighborhood kids started calling it the comm box within days. They would ride their bikes past just to look at it. Adults began asking if they could pose in front of it for their holiday photos. Mrs. Chen from 2 doors down told me it reminded her of her grandmother's village in Taiwan. A teenager named Marcus told me he looked at it before his SAT and it helped him not throw up. Marla went DEFCON patio within 72 hours. First came the violation letter on official Birch Ridge Enrichment Association letterhead, which she had apparently printed at FedEx office. It accused me of installing an unauthorized shed disguised as a maritime crate in violation of Section 9.4 of the Covenants. I read it twice trying to find where it mentioned containers. It did not. Then came a second notice about unsanctioned wall art. According to Marla, outdoor paintings must be neutral taupe per palette B, which was a paint swatch guide she had created herself during the great mailbox color crisis of 2023. The mural, she wrote, constitutes a visual disturbance and unauthorized creative expression. She began conducting 6 a.m. walk-by assessments every single morning. I would watch from my kitchen window as she measured from the sidewalk to my fence, from my fence to the container, from the container to the nearest tree. She had a clipboard. She had a measuring tape. She looked like she was trying to triangulate a comet's trajectory or possibly summon a demon using geometry. She posted drone photos to the HOA app, which yes, we have an app, with captions in all caps. Is this a commercial art installation? One post demanded. Unapproved outdoor advertising? Asked another, despite the mural advertising absolutely nothing except maybe inner peace. She told everyone at the pool that my mural was attracting mall traffic, though she could never explain what mall traffic meant or provide evidence of it. She slipped flyers into mailboxes all over the neighborhood. Bright yellow papers with alarming questions printed in 72-point font. What's next? An artist commune? Outdoor theater? Unauthorized joy? That last one was not actually on there but might as well have been. I responded the way any reasonable person would. I sent her the city code, highlighted and annotated, showing that temporary containers were allowed for 120 days with a simple online notice. I included screenshots of my submitted notification with a timestamp. I also included the blessed phrase that architectural control applies to structures, and per municipal definition section 2-3, a container is explicitly not a structure. I printed everything on custom letterhead that said Happy Little Legal Team with a tiny Bob Ross silhouette in the corner. I mailed it certified with return receipt requested. Her signature on that receipt looked angry, which I did not know was possible, but the pen strokes were very aggressive. Marla's response was to schedule more drone flights, start a neighborhood petition, and post on the community Facebook group asking if anyone else was concerned about the precedent this sets. 3 people liked her post. 47 people commented with heart emojis on the photo of my container. But cornered Karens escalate, and Marla was feeling very cornered. She called the fire marshal to report a flammable hazard, claiming she had seen smoke coming from the container, which was a complete fabrication since I had never even been inside it with anything lit. She told the city inspector there were hazardous chemicals stored inside, possibly paint thinner, possibly worse. Then she committed the big mistake, the one that turned this from annoying to criminal. On a Thursday afternoon while I was out grocery shopping, Marla jumped my back fence. This required a stepladder on her side, which meant premeditation. She brought supplies. A neon orange sticker that read condemned by HOA in huge letters. A paint roller. A gallon of Battleship Gray primer. My Nest camera captured everything in glorious high definition. Marla, in capri pants and a visor, climbing my fence like the world's angriest cat burglar. Marla slapping that sticker on the container door with the intensity of someone tagging a building for demolition. And then, this is the part one have watched 37 times, Marla opening that paint can and absolutely going to town on my beautiful sky with angry gray strokes. She painted for 11 minutes. She was breathing hard. She looked possessed. At one point she stepped back, seemed to admire her work, then painted more gray like she was personally offended by the color blue. That single act turned my pretty little dispute into criminal trespass and vandalism with a side of destruction of property. But it gets better, because here is something Marla did not know. Birch Ridge had recently passed a public art ordinance after the Whole Foods mural controversy, where someone painted a very controversial eggplant on the sidewall and half the town lost their minds. The new ordinance stated that any neighborhood visible art, even on private property, counts as protected cultural display unless it depicts nudity, hate symbols, or the color mauve. That last one was specific to someone's aunt who had very strong opinions. Marla had just graffitied a protected cultural display with the emotional equivalent of sadness in a can. When the city inspector and fire marshal arrived the next morning, I was ready. So was Officer Del Toro, who showed up after I called the non-emergency line and mentioned the words trespass and vandalism. Officer Del Toro is a man blessed with the gift of disappointed eyebrows that can make you confess to crimes you did not commit just from the weight of his stare. I opened the container for them with a flourish. Inside was nothing but neatly stacked cedar planks organized by size, a shop vacuum that sparkled because I am that person, and a carefully labeled box of sandpaper grits. The fire marshal sniffed the air like a wine sommelier and said with absolute confusion that it smelled like pine. Just pine and maybe lemon pledge. The inspector examined everything with his flashlight. No chemicals. No hazards. No violations of any code anywhere. Then I presented my evidence like I was on Law and Order. The online permit notice with date stamp. The HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions with the definition of structure highlighted in yellow on page 63. My certified mail receipt with Marla's angry signature. And the nest footage. We watched it on my phone right there on the driveway. Marla climbing. Marla stickering. Marla painting with the energy of someone fighting their own demons using primer. The inspector made a noise like he was trying not to laugh. The fire marshal said that is clearly vandalism. Officer Del Toro said in that special cop voice reserved for addressing pure absurdity, so let me get this straight. The HOA president trespassed on your property, vandalized protected public art, filed false reports with the city, and attempted to have your legal property towed based entirely on her personal feelings about shipping containers? I nodded. The tow guy, still loitering by his truck because apparently this was the most interesting thing that had happened to him all month, added for the record that he had refused the towing job. He said those trees were genuinely soothing and he did not feel right destroying something that beautiful. He also said his therapist would probably approve of the mural. Citations were issued to Marla right there on my driveway at 9:47 a.m. Criminal trespass. Vandalism. Filing a false report. A protective order was drafted requiring her to remain 100 feet from my fence line, my container, and per Officer Del Toro's personal edition, any item containing joy or artistic merit. But Marla was not done. She doubled down. She convened an emergency compliance hearing at the clubhouse for that Saturday afternoon. She sent out a mass email with the subject line community integrity at stake. She promised this would settle the matter once and for all. Half the neighborhood showed up for the drama. The other half came because someone promised Costco cookies and people will show up anywhere for bulk baked goods. The clubhouse was packed. Marla had set up a projector like this was a TED Talk. She dimmed the lights and clicked through her slideshow titled in bold red letters, Sheds Threaten Property Values, a data-driven analysis. Slide 1 was a stock photo of a collapsing barn. Slide 2 was a raccoon wearing a hard hat, which I still do not understand the relevance of. Slide 3 was a pie chart mysteriously labeled chaos with no other context. She spoke for 12 minutes about neighborhood standards, property value protection, and the slippery slope of unauthorized storage. She used the phrase "what's next" at least 9 times. What's next? She asked the crowd. RVs? Tiny homes? Geodesic domes? She said geodesic domes like they were a war crime. When it was finally my turn, I did not bring a projector. I brought my phone, a speaker, and the truth. I queued up the Nest video of Marla scaling my fence with a paint roller like some kind of gray-swathed Spider-Mom on a mission from the HOA gods. I hit play. The room went silent except for the sound of Marla's heavy breathing on camera. Audible gasps filled the room. Someone said, "Oh my God." Mrs. Chen covered her mouth. Marcus, the SAT kid, said that is actually insane. I let it play all 11 minutes. Marla tried to object twice, but the board president told her to sit down. Then I introduced Renee, the local art teacher from Birch Ridge Elementary, who I had asked to come testify. Renee stood up and explained in her calm teacher voice that 2 of her students with severe anxiety disorders now walk past the comm-box every morning before exams because the trees help them feel centered. She said one student's panic attacks had decreased by half since the mural went up. She brought a note from the school counselor confirming it. The city inspector followed. He patiently explained the public art ordinance, the definition of temporary storage, the definition of structure, and my full compliance with every single city code. He also noted that Marla's vandalism had damaged protected cultural property, which carried enhanced penalties. Finally, Officer Del Toro stood up and read aloud from his citation report. Criminal trespass. Vandalism of protected property. Filing false emergency reports. Attempting to abuse civil authority. And the potential misdemeanor charges Marla was now facing, which could include up to 6 months in jail and fines up to $5,000. The HOA board, composed of 6 people who suddenly looked like they wanted to be anywhere else, called for a vote. Under the combined weight of actual law, video evidence, and the most intense collective eye contact I have ever witnessed in a suburban clubhouse, they voted 6-0. All violations against me were reversed. A written apology would be issued. And Marla Yates was suspended from the board pending a full investigation. Someone in the back row, I think it was the teenager Marcus, whispered with absolute reverence, "Release the happy trees." It got a bigger laugh than it should have. Marla's consequences arrived like delayed Amazon packages over the following weeks. The city fined her $2,000 for vandalism and criminal trespass. An additional $1,500 for filing false emergency reports. The HOA board held a special meeting and voted unanimously to permanently remove her from the architectural committee and strip her of her presidency. She was reassigned to community beautification as a regular volunteer, the lowest position possible. Per her court-ordered diversion agreement to avoid jail time, she had to spend 60 hours restoring murals and public art under a licensed art teacher's supervision. Her first assignment was to repaint the portion of sky she had defaced, following a Bob Ross technique video step by step, stroke by stroke. She was explicitly forbidden from using any shade of gray paint. The judge added that restriction himself after reviewing the footage. He said, and this is a direct quote from the court transcript, "Perhaps learning to create instead of destroy will teach Ms. Yates something about community." When the final verdict was read in court, Marla stood frozen at the defendant's table, her sun visor clutched in both hands like a life preserver. She stared at the judge like he had just told her the earth was flat and also on fire. Her mouth opened and closed twice, no sound coming out. Finally, she whispered in complete disbelief, "This is about a shed." The judge replied calmly, "No, ma'am, this is about respecting the law and your neighbor's property."